silence. When I'm gone, please believe. You're whole.
Are you insane? No, I'm not. However, the actions I adopted may look insane towards society. But basically what I do is an ancient right of getting rid of scum. I'm standing over him with the axe. Swung again. That's ancient justice.
Coming from this Joppa townhouse on the same day that a boarder renting a room inside, 37-year-old Cujo Agiacodi was last seen alive.
I heard loud music, like really loud, and that's unusual.
Police flooded the neighborhood, searching for evidence that Cody had been murdered.
Tell me what happened.
Last night, I went down to the basement and I opened the laundry door. And I saw 2 pans for baking. And then I saw 3 different objects. And they looked like hands and a head. I asked Alex, come down here. I asked him, what is it? And he said, don't worry about it. It's none of your business.
When you see these remains inside the pan, do you think that maybe they're,
Cujo?
Mm-hmm.
That was my first thought.
You know, Cujo's been missing 4 days.
That's right.
You know, we're pretty concerned about him, obviously.
I'm worried about him, too.
If you were us, where would you look for Cujo?
Cujo, big girl. Probably have to stay.
Out of state. Why did he choose out of state? He's play acting. He's playing the card of, you know, I don't know what you want from me. Misdirection can sometimes be useful, but it comes across as lame in a way.
He's not particularly believable. He's detached. His facial expression and voice are not appropriate for what's happened. And that's also true of his body. He's stiff, he's cold, and he's numb.
I just want to talk to you tonight about what your brother saw.
Last week, I collected a jackal or a fox. It was like roadkill. Usually, I trap animals, so I figured let me gut it up.
What do you do with the meat?
I brought it in. It was nasty.
Why would your brother think they were human?
He said that he saw something that was black in him, like he couldn't really describe it, and he said he wasn't sure. And he mentioned it to my father and mother.
Okay.
Nothing about no human skull.
Were they parts of Cujo?
No.
His story isn't plausible. I just can't believe for a minute that the brother would come down the stairs and mistake a human skull and hands in baking trays for roadkill.
The officer didn't ask him about skulls, so he chose to interject the notion of a skull. And there's your tell.
Cujo is dead. That's a fact. So the question is, why? You can tell the difference between the blood of a fox and the blood of a human being.
Yes.
What do you think the blood under your mattress showed?
That's a blood from period.
From period?
Yeah, a woman's period.
And what woman would that be?
Oh, she doesn't stay in
What about the blood that was in
the box. Blood box. That's a fox blood there.
that was human blood? Tell me, Alex, tell me what you did. How did you kill him?
Cujo was staying in the basement. Nobody wants to go into the basement. And I stay in the basement with him. So I asked him, is he ready to die? He's like, no, he's not ready to die. So, too bad he made the angel of death.
You waited for him to fall asleep.
Oh, yeah.
How was he sleeping?
In a funeral rest position. When I came downstairs, I'm standing over him with the axe. I swung. I swung again.
Where did you strike him with the axe?
His jaw. The blood came gushing from his body. The body didn't move. After that, I chopped him up and said a prayer for him.
Why do you say a prayer for him? One suspects that, references to angels of death and saying prayers, that somewhere in his head is this kind of religious delusion. This is highly ritualized, and it reflects a lot of very discombobulated thinking and perverse thinking.
In order for you to commit such a violent crime, and then to continue with it, you have to completely dehumanize the victim. The callousness, that's the core of psychopathy.
We're looking at someone who I think has a thought disorder, that has a psychotic disorder. He is inert, and he's sitting there, and in response to the question, he's simply recalling events. It's as if he's just reciting the sequence.
After that, I let him bleed out. And I got him a knife, cut him off, and took his heart out.
What did you use to cut his heart out?
I used my hands.
I'm sure from his perspective, the heart is symbolic of something. It's kind of in a perverse way, like a mythological power move. It's sort of like from a warrior's perspective, which is what I think he likens himself to on some level. You're robbing your victim of his essence. It's certainly not anything that people believe in contemporary societies. I don't know why these rituals would be important to him, but that's typically, anthropologically and historically, what these things signify.
You were responsible for what happened to Cujo, but this was an opportunity for you to say why this thing happened.
I want to say that.
Is this what I'm left with? Even his family? Yeah, he killed Cujo, but he wasn't going to tell me because he wanted to get a cigarette. That's terrible, Alex.
No, life is terrible.
Did you take his life?
I mean, he's not in existence.
Where did Cujo wind up?
It's right under your nose.
Not at the police station, I hope.
No.
Okay, where?
Well, one is in my stomach.
What part was that?
It's hot.
I believe there is a religious aspect to him consuming Cujo's heart. In the history of cannibalism, in these religious practices where people were consumed, it was really important to assimilate the life, the soul, the energy from the other person. But what we're seeing here is a contemporary manifestation of it in a person who's delusional.
Criminal cannibalism is extremely rare. One of the biggest taboos in modern life is the consumption of human flesh. And this is pathological, meaning it's linked to something that's not part of a ritual, that's not part of a system, that's not part of a society.
He laughs when he's talking about it. It's grotesque in a way that leads one to thinking that he really is psychotic.
Are there pieces of Cujo in or around your house? Can you give me an idea where they are?
Well, his head is taken care of.
Can you tell me any more than that?
Do you have anybody at the house right now?
Mm-hmm.
Can you get him on the phone?
I'm gonna put you on speakerphone, okay?
All right. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, go to the dining room. Do you see a bag of charcoal?
Your brother mentioned seeing the head, and he also thought he saw some hands.
Everything's in there.
Everything's in the one charcoal bag. Okay.
That's what he put.
Kinua is amused and smug, and there are two explanations for this. It's actually very common for schizophrenics to laugh heartily while describing something not at all funny. And part of it, of course, could be attributed to the callousness that you see in psychopathy, so perhaps it's a blend of both.
He's not disturbed by the killing. That's the psychopathic element. The driving force for that may be delusional. In his mind, it all makes sense. They're still shocked by it, as we are when we learn about what he did. But in his mind, that's what was necessary to do.
Nobody is safe, no matter where you are. It could be even in your own room. It could be even in your own school. It could be in anywhere. It could be in your office. It could be in your home. It could be anywhere.
The guy's paranoid. And that's the message that he's broadcasting, is that no one is really safe. So that must mean he thinks things can happen to him too.
This is a social media post that Alex Kinua posted about 6 months before he committed the crime. Never forget the Virginia Tech massacre, students. Take note of a problem, solve that. Event for spring 2012 coming up. Prevent another university shooting. He would view us as the problem, that we who don't take action are the problem. He is the solution.
He was in Maryland, and that's right next door to Virginia. So I think, there's certainly a proximity, maybe a fear, but if you're paranoid, that proximity gets closer than it really is. You get a sense of Mr. Kinua's life that there was always some kind of threat lurking. Mr. Kinua was diagnosed formally as paranoid schizophrenic. It's important to note that most paranoid schizophrenics are not remotely violent. But paranoid schizophrenia with psychopathic features and violence are an extremely dangerous combination.
Alex, what threat did you perceive from Cujo? Why did you do what you did?
The whole family demeanor has changed. Why Cujo staying in the basement? There's no certain motive was to sacrifice my family. I saw it real clearly. And I was like, okay, not another night in our house. I pick up on instinct, instinctual person. I'm overprotected. His hands get touched. Just the thought of him touching any of my brothers, or my sister, or my parents, cousins, or his head.
Let's not forget that he's already dead. It's really not consistent with anything that we typically think of in Western culture. After, someone has died, that parts of their body pose a threat.
It can seem pretty demented if you're a normal person. If you happen to be paranoid, it absolutely makes sense. He's seeing plots and evil intent in things that you or I might look at and say, wait a minute, they're not necessarily connected.
This is part of, the delusional worsening, that the family's under threat, they're being annihilated by an outsider. As the delusions get deeper, so does the psychopathic process.
Nobody has been messing with my brothers and sisters because I've been here. Because when they came here, they were younger. We were like prey.
You were the protector now.
Well, I'm like the predator.
This is your trophy to yourself. Am I wrong?
Trophy, I would say trophy more so like collector's item.
He seems proud of what he did. There's like a feather in his cap that he could wield this much power.
This has a much deeper meaning, perhaps something of a religious significance. His comment that it's not a trophy, but that he's a collector, it's intriguing. We certainly have seen in different serial killers that people collect a memento. They collect an object. He's taking body parts, right? Whereas other people keep a necklace, a bracelet, or something else. They don't perhaps engage in cannibalism. Like many people who have a delusion, once they've decided to tell you about it, they're usually very straightforward about what their thinking is, because in their mind, they're not crazy. From Kimya's perspective, he is defending his family from someone who has a plot to harm them all, or who is molesting them, and who is going to kill his family in some way.
Did you put him in anything?
Wrapped him up in a bag.
And took him where?
To the judge.
Was there any particular reason that you did that?
That's symbolic. I cooked his head and his hands.
And then what did you do with him after that?
Prepare to eat him.
There is a ritualistic component to what he's describing. So he would fall into our category of a visionary psychopath. He's completing a mission that he believes in, and this gives him permission to do all these things and feel no remorse.
Bringing this dismembered body to a church ties into his delusional system, this kind of religious idea.
How do you feel now?
Justice is served. That's all of it.
What do you think should happen to you for this?
Put me in Saints now. I don't know.
Are you insane?
No, I'm not. However, the action adopted me look insane towards society. But basically what I do is ancient right of getting rid of scum.
And that's the way you look at Cujo.
That's ancient justice.
Ancient justice. this can feel pretty cold to the rest of us. This view of the other person as a non-person and not having feelings or remorse is a sign of being a psychopath.
It's funny to me that he says, I'm not insane. But the truth is, there's no really good reason for this crime to have been committed other than paranoia.
21-year-old Alexander Kenyua, who was indicted in June on first-degree murder, has been undergoing a competency evaluation at a maximum security.
This is about 911. Do you have an emergency?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, wrong number.
Everything's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
No, everything's not okay.
What's the problem there?
I tried to kidnap a man today and take his car. And I didn't want to hurt him, and I almost did, and I'm sick of it. I know I'm going to go to waste the rest of my life, but it's better I'm in there than out here. Because if I'm out here, I've got a problem.
Did you point a knife at the operator?
Yes, I did, sir.
Okay.
And I threatened to kill him. I've been on the run for 3 years.
Are you wanted anywhere?
I'm wanted in North Carolina for 5 bank robberies. I'm also wanted in New Hampshire for murder now.
Is that on file somewhere?
No, it just happened yesterday. And I've killed 2 people in Massachusetts.
For what?
The vehicles. Sick, huh?
It's not good.
That's why I called.
I think Samson planned to return to New England, where he grew up. I think how he was gonna get there, who he was gonna take out in the process, and how he was gonna take them out was totally impulsive. It was opportunistic crime, and the fact that he could steal someone's car and someone's money and also take their life at the same time and it all be impulsive is part of what makes Samson as dangerous as he is.
Samson turned himself in so willingly, potentially, because he wanted to have control over his apprehension. There's a grandiosity about it. I can't help but wonder if there's some shock value he's looking for in disclosing all of this. It's possible he was also tired of keeping this up, / knew he was potentially going to be caught because of this last failed attempt. So went ahead so that ultimately he would have control over the situation. Rather than he get apprehended, he's turning himself in on his own terms. It could be self-defeating, but control is what psychopaths like to have.
So these 2 people in Massachusetts, what was that all about?
His vehicles and money.
You know?
Nope. Hitchhiking.
Use a knife like you did here to gain control?
Yes.
You know the names of any of the people you killed?
No.
And how'd you kill them?
The knife. Slit the throat. One body I know they found already. I read that in the newspaper. Cried for about 2 hours.
I don't think he was crying. I have a very difficult time believing that a psychopathic person like Samson is in touch with any level of emotion or empathy or regret or remorse.
Why are you doing this? Why are you killing people? Do you know?
Not really. I guess now that this is all over, I have to sit down and figure out why. like to talk to us, Gary? Yes, I am. I don't want a lawyer. I want to confess the crimes that I've committed. I was walking, and I walked about probably 15, 20 miles at that time. And I decided to hitchhike. An old man picked me up in a van. Talked to him for a few minutes. I pulled a knife on him, told him to drive. So what I was going to do was I was going to take his van, I was going to take any money he had on him, and tie you up, and I'm going to be on my way. We parked the van on this little side road, and we walked up the hill. I had to help him a little bit. He was a spunky old man. I didn't think he was going to give me a hard time. I went to take my belt and put it around his wrists, and he shoved me back and went to push me, and I stabbed him once in the back. And then I stabbed him in the heart, in the lungs, in the chest. He went down on the ground. I slit his throat. Why? I do not know.
The level of force and violence he uses is so much greater than what is necessary to subdue his victim and accomplish his goal that you really have to think of it as overkill.
This is a killing that reflects rage. It doesn't reflect an instrumental desire to just get rid of this guy and then grab his car. I mean, he really did him in. So the question is, why?
I found a $100 bill, his wallet, everything. My shirt was covered with blood. I almost got sick, but I didn't. I took some soda to wash some of the blood off, and I started walking down the road. I'll find something to pick me up. I've already committed one murder. I'll steal a vehicle, and I'll kill them if I have to. I went to the beach, washed up a little bit more, went and got some alcohol, and went out to Birch Beach, and sat there on the jetty and drank a 12-pack of Natural Light and a pint of rum. And I slept on the beach. I don't have any remorse at this time because I haven't actually figured everything out what I've done.
The typical individual would feel remorse about the outcome of somebody dying, regardless if you knew why you did it or not. He is trying to intellectualize why he did what he did. That's striking in and of itself. And one of the key traits of psychopathy is a lack of remorse, which he very clearly has here a week later. Still saying, well, because I don't know why I did it, therefore I can't feel remorse.
I believe him when he says he has no remorse. Psychopaths get the idea that this is what people or society would expect of them for doing something bad. But they just say, I don't feel it. There's something defective in the wiring. You know, there's no doubt about it.
Downtown in Plymouth, I got to the bus station and realized I ain't got no money. And I stick out and I look like a transient. So I went in there and got cleaned up into some nice clothes. That was my cover.
So if you dress well, cops don't stop and talk to you.
Well, when you're dressed in $100 designer jeans, you know. From there, I walked through town. I looked presentable. I looked like I belonged there. I had a Walkman on my head, little backpack, looked like a yuppie.
Samson's obsession with and desire to maintain cleanliness, to present well, to have nice clothes on, it's part of his ability to manipulate people. It's part of his ability to navigate environments and blend in. He has a very strong ability to be a chameleon, and that certainly makes him a more dangerous psychopath because he is able to blend in a variety of environments.
People don't bother me. If I am harassed or threatened or disrespected in any way, I'll bite.
He was coming from work. I waited till it was an unpopulated area and I pulled a knife out and told him I didn't want to hurt him. I'm wanted by the law. I'm a bank robber. And then I didn't tell him about the other murder. I said that I'd kill him if he messed with me.
What was his response to what you were doing?
I'll do anything you want, just don't hurt me. I made him drive me out to the highway. He told me his life story. He even talked to me about robbing banks with me. I made him go out into the woods with me. I sprayed him with awe to make him think that I wasn't going to kill him. Though it was premeditated, I planned on killing him. I needed the vehicle for a long period of time. And I tied him with his hands behind his back to the tree.
He's trying to essentially seduce them and make them feel comfortable, despite the fact that he knows he's going to kill them. So it's manipulative, it's smart, and I think it reveals a level of sadism, too, because he knows what he's going to do. So, interestingly, he doesn't have to frighten them and terrorize them.
His notion of what he's going to do does start to speak to maybe some compulsion that is now starting to emerge, that there's a ritual, there's a script on how this is supposed to go.
I gagged him with his own sock, and then I slit his throat, stabbed him in the chest, in the neck, and killed him quickly. I didn't torture him or anything. I'm not a sadist. I'm just a sick murderer.
It seems clear to me that Samson has more sadistic fantasies than he's willing to let on, while he identifies himself as someone who is not a sadist. For sadistic violent offenders, the high or the arousal comes from simply watching fear. And for Samson, if this is early in his experience with sadism, over time, what I would expect is that he's going to need more to get that same high.
I took his life, and I was covered in blood. Again, I had a bottle of soda. I washed up with it, put some clean clothes on. Then I took his car. I had to see my son. I drove by and I looked at her parents' house and her car was sitting there.
Where is this house, Gary?
That house is in Madison, New Hampshire. I have nothing to lose, and I have nothing to live for. I told my father-in-law not to let my son ever know who I was. My father-in-law hated me. I knew he was going to call the cops. Sure enough, he called the cops on me. And I kicked myself for not killing him while I was dead. I should have killed him. I would have decapitated him, but his wife was in the other room too. And Norma's a sweetheart, love her to death. I won't hurt a woman.
Why is that, Gary?
I guess growing up in prison, I've just always been around men. And I look at it my mother, my children. I guess I got something within me that ain't that bad. I love my mom. My mom was great, but my father beat out of me. I love him too.
The fact that Samson reported that his father abused him does make me wonder if the choice for his victims, the fact that they're all males, is intentional, and perhaps he has a vendetta against men in general. Maybe he was abused by other males in his life as well.
A long time.
Samson is becoming increasingly brazen. That is typical of psychopathy. You have a sense that he's flying by the seat of his pants, you know, so he's willing to do almost anything.
I heard a car pull in a little bit later. I figure, oh great, it's over with. But it's the maintenance man. He says, well, who are you? I says, well, I'm a friend of the family's. So he says, well, I got to get in there, get downstairs to get at the lawnmower. I says, well, come on in here. I was looking at his car. I'm like, I'm going to get rid of this car and get another car. He came in the house. I pulled a knife on him. I said, all right, I'm gonna tie you up. He says, okay. I tied him up.
What was he saying to you?
Are you gonna take my car? Yes, I am. He says, you gonna kill me? I says, nah, I ain't gonna kill you. And he kept talking, and I'd taken a blue face cloth, stuck it in his mouth. I didn't want no more blood on me. I grabbed the yellow rope and hooked it over his throat and tightened it and choked him to death. The man died slowly. And I watched him, and it didn't bother me as he turned blue.
It's interesting that he didn't want any blood on him. Killing someone is not upsetting to him, but getting messed up physically, dirtied, that's really unappealing to him.
Samson has now changed his method of killing. For people who have childhood trauma or sexual trauma, that cleaning up is part of the ritual of feeling okay. But he didn't want to go through the ritual of having to clean himself up. And he's dabbling now in that arousal that is sadism. He's trying out something else to see if he likes it more, if he likes it differently, what kind of high it gives him.
Woke up the next morning, started hitchhiking. I ended up trying it again. And I was gonna kill again. That man got away from me. But I took his vehicle and I got away from the law. Myself into the FBI. before any of the murders took place, and that didn't work.
When was it you called the FBI, Gary?
It was the day before I killed the first man. I knew what was going to happen.
You called the FBI before the old man got killed.
I told them, if I don't want to get killed, I want the FBI to meet me at the Island Grove Bridge. I'll be in the middle of the bridge at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, unarmed. They never showed up. I was there, I swear. Just wait. I got pissed off. So the heck with it. I guess they don't give a damn about me or anybody else.
The call comes in just after midnight, the kind of hour when the city is quiet enough to hear its own breathing, when streetlights hum and shadows feel heavier than they should, when whatever is about to happen has already decided it will not be ordinary. A patrol car pulls up to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of a California town that doesn't expect to make national news, a place of trimmed lawns and unlocked doors, and within minutes the stillness collapses into flashing red and blue, radios crackling. Officers moving faster than the moment can explain. Inside one of the units, the lights are on. The television still murmuring to an empty room, and on the floor lies a scene that will refuse to settle for decades, a moment frozen in 1998 that will never fully thaw. The victim is young, known, ordinary in a way that makes the violence feel obscene. A routine life interrupted, without warning. Neighbors will later say they heard nothing unusual, no scream, no argument, no crash in the night, only the familiar sounds of plumbing and passing cars, the soft illusion of safety. Investigators step carefully, photographing every angle, cataloging every object, trying to read the room like a confession written in dust and blood. There is no sign of forced entry, no obvious weapon left behind. No clear explanation that fits neatly into a report. From the very first hour, the case resists. By morning, the story leaks into the community, spreading faster than the facts. Police tape flutters in the sun. Reporters gather at a distance. The victim's name appears on local news tickers, then in headlines that grow more dramatic with each retelling. Friends are stunned. Coworkers replay their last conversations, searching for hidden meaning. Family members arrive at the station with questions that have no answers yet, and perhaps never will. Investigators reassure them this will be handled quickly, that leads will come, that justice is a matter of time, but even as the words are spoken, the evidence refuses to cooperate. The apartment is clean. Too clean, some would say. No overturned furniture, no obvious struggle, no trail leading outward. Fingerprints are lifted, photographed, sealed into evidence bags that promise clarity later. Fibers are collected, hair samples preserved, each one a potential voice from the past. The medical examiner works carefully, determining time of death, cause, the silent facts the body can still provide. It points to a narrow window, late evening to early morning, a span of hours wide enough for anyone and no one at all. Detectives canvass the building, knocking on doors, asking the same questions again and again. Did you see anyone? Did you hear anything? Did anything seem off? Most answers are variations of no. One neighbor mentions a car idling briefly in the lot, headlights off, engine low. Another recalls footsteps in the hallway, nothing more. Vague impressions that dissolve under scrutiny. No license plate. No description that holds. The case file grows thicker, but not clearer. Attention turns inward, as it often does. Friends, romantic partners, co-workers. Anyone with access. Anyone with motive. Anyone who could explain why a life ended on an ordinary night. Interviews stretch into hours. Alibis are checked, rechecked, poked until they either hold or crumble. But nothing collapses. Everyone seems just believable enough. Suspicion spreads thin, then thinner still, until it becomes background noise. Days pass, then weeks. Evidence is sent to labs already burdened with backlogs, results promised, but delayed. The town grows restless. Candlelight vigils appear on sidewalks. Talk radio speculates. Newspapers begin to use a phrase that lands like a bruise. Cold case. Not yet, Not officially, but the tone shifts, the urgency dulls. The sense that this will be solved quickly fades into something more uncertain, more unsettling. Detectives push where they can. Phone records are examined, tracing calls made and not returned. Bank statements reveal nothing out of place. There is no sudden withdrawal, no hint of escape or secret planning. The victim had plans, appointments, a future that now exists only in past tense. A computer is seized, its contents scanned for hidden messages, strange searches, digital footprints that might lead somewhere. What they find is normalcy, the most frustrating clue of all. Then there is the detail no one can quite explain, the oddity that sits in the file like a question mark circled in red. A minor inconsistency at the scene, something that doesn't align with the rest, something small enough to be overlooked but strange enough to haunt the investigators who notice it. They argue about it late at night, in offices lit by desk lamps and vending machine glow, wondering if it's the key or a distraction, the thread that unravels everything or the one that leads nowhere. They chase it anyway because they have nothing better.
Tips come in. Hundreds of them.
Some earnest, some malicious, some born of dreams and suspicion. A stranger seen at a gas station. A former acquaintance who moved away suddenly. A rumor overheard in a bar. Each tip is logged, evaluated, most quietly dismissed. The case refuses to narrow. It sprawls instead, a map with too many roads and no clear destination. As months turn into years, the investigation changes shape. Original detectives are reassigned. New ones inherit the file, flipping through pages that smell faintly of age and frustration. They promise themselves fresh eyes, will see what others missed. They re-interview witnesses, re-examine evidence, run prints through updated databases. Occasionally, something sparks hope, a partial match, a new technology, a whisper that this time might be different. Each time, the spark fades. The community carries the weight in its own way. The apartment complex gets new tenants who sense something wrong without knowing why. Parents lock doors more carefully. The victim's name becomes a reference point, a cautionary tale, a reminder that bad things can happen without warning, without reason, without resolution. Anniversaries pass marked by brief news segments and quieter gatherings, grief that has learned to live with unanswered questions. In 1998, the case slips officially into the category no one wants to say out loud.
Cold case.
The evidence is boxed, labeled, stored. The file remains, thick and stubborn, waiting for something the past did not provide. Yet even as it cools, it never fully dies. It lingers in the minds of those who worked it, in the family who refuses to forget, in the small details that never quite made sense. Years later, long after the initial shock has dulled, something stirs. A development so small, it almost goes unnoticed at first. A record digitized. A sample retested. A name resurfacing in a different context, a different investigation, a different time. It does not solve anything yet. It does not answer the questions that have waited since that quiet night. But it cracks the surface, just enough to remind everyone that the past is not as settled as it seems, that cold cases have a way of breathing again when no one expects it. And somewhere in California, in a town that learned to live with uncertainty, the story begins to move once more, slow and deliberate, carrying with it the weight of years and the promise, or the threat, that the truth has not finished speaking. By the time the file is pulled from storage again, the cardboard edges are soft, corners rounded by years of handling, the label faded just enough to suggest neglect rather than closure. A new detective runs a thumb along the spine, reading names of officers who have since retired, transferred, or died, and feels the familiar mix of curiosity and dread that comes with cold case work, the sense of stepping into a room where everyone else has already failed. The year on the cover still reads 1998, but the weight inside belongs to every year since, each one layered with missed chances and questions left hanging in the air. Technology has changed. That is the promise. DNA databases are broader, software sharper, connections faster. Evidence, once considered inconclusive, is suddenly valuable again. Bags are reopened. Seals are checked. Samples that sat silent for decades are prepared for another attempt at speech. The lab hums with quiet confidence, machines blinking like they know something the people do not. Investigators allow themselves cautious optimism, the kind that does not yet dare to become belief. The re-examination starts at the beginning, as it always must. Scene photos are spread across a table, images of a room frozen in another century. The arrangement of furniture, the angle of the body, the details that were ordinary then, but strange now. What was ignored? What was misread? What was simply invisible at the time? The detective lingers on one photograph longer than the others, the one showing an object out of place, something subtle that never quite fit the narrative everyone agreed on. It doesn't scream guilt. It whispers inconsistency. Witness statements are read again, voices resurrected on yellowing paper. The neighbor who heard footsteps. The one who noticed the idling car. The friend who said the victim seemed distracted that week, preoccupied but unwilling to explain why. At the time, these fragments refused to assemble into anything solid. Now they are rearranged, tested against new timelines, new theories. Some statements age poorly. Others grow sharper with context. Memory, once unreliable, becomes a tool rather than a liability. A name appears more often than the others. It did back then too, briefly, before slipping out of focus. Not a prime suspect. Not even a strong one. Just someone adjacent, orbiting the victim's life without ever fully intersecting. An acquaintance, perhaps. Someone who had reason to be nearby, reason enough to explain presence but not intent. The original investigators noted it, flagged it, then moved on when nothing stuck. Now the name is circled again, darker ink, heavier hand. Background checks reveal a life that looks ordinary on the surface. Employment history, addresses, relationships that start and end without obvious drama. But there are gaps. Time unaccounted for. Moves that don't quite line up with job changes. Small inconsistencies that could mean nothing or everything. The detective marks them all, building a timeline that stretches back into the late 90s, reconstructing days that no one expected to matter this much. When the person is contacted again, decades later, the reaction is measured, almost bored. They remember the victim, they say. Of course they do. It was a long time ago. They're surprised anyone is still asking questions. They answer politely, confidently, repeating details that sound rehearsed without being obviously false. Their alibi is the same as before, unchanged by time, as if memory has frozen in place. That alone raises an eyebrow. Most people forget. This one does not. The interview room feels smaller than it should. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. The detective listens more than they speak, watching for shifts in posture, for hesitation that lingers half a second too long. When the conversation drifts toward the night of the murder, something changes. It's subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a pause before answering a question that should be simple. Not proof, not even evidence, just friction, the sense that the truth is not sliding as smoothly as it should. Meanwhile, the lab calls back. Preliminary results. A partial match from a sample collected at the scene, previously unusable, now run through expanded databases. It does not give a name yet. It gives a direction. A genetic profile that suggests a family line, a cluster of possibilities rather than a single identity. Investigators feel the pulse quicken. This is how cases wake up. Slowly, then all at once.
Genealogists are brought in.
Family trees are built backward, forward, sideways, names branching across decades. It is meticulous work, the kind that requires patience and imagination in equal measure. Each branch leads to more names, more lives, more potential connections to a crime that happened before some of them were even born. Eventually, the branches narrow. The profile begins to resemble someone who lived in the right place at the right time, someone whose name is already circled in the file. The convergence is impossible to ignore. Circumstantial, yes, but compelling. The detective feels the shift, the moment when a case stops being abstract and becomes personal again. Surveillance is authorized. Quietly.
Carefully.
The subject goes about their life unaware or pretending to be. They work, shop, interact with neighbors who have no idea they're living beside a ghost from a different era. Investigators watch from a distance, documenting routines, waiting for a mistake. Trash pulls are conducted under cover of darkness, the modern equivalent of shaking a suspect until something falls out. Coffee cups, napkins, discarded tissues. Each item is cataloged, preserved, rushed to the lab like contraband. The wait is agonizing. Days stretch. Nights grow longer. The detective replays interviews in their head, wondering if they pushed too hard or not enough, if the signs they saw were real or imagined. When the confirmation comes, it arrives without ceremony. A call, a few words, a match strong enough to stand in court. Not perfect, not complete, but undeniable. The DNA from the trash aligns with a partial profile from the scene, aligning decades of silence into a single, trembling line. The room feels suddenly too quiet. The weight of the moment presses down, heavy with expectation. An arrest warrant is prepared, carefully worded, reviewed and re-reviewed. The decision to move is not taken lightly. This is not just another suspect. This is a promise made long ago, finally calling in its debt. The arrest happens late at night, the way these things often do, when resistance is less likely and the world is less crowded. Lights flash again, echoing that first night in 1998, history folding in on itself. The suspect is taken into custody, without incident. Neighbors watch from behind curtains, confused, curious, unaware of the timeline collapsing in front of them. At the station, fingerprints are taken. DNA samples collected formally this time. Rights are read. The room smells of disinfectant and old coffee, the same as it always has, as if the building itself refuses to age. Interrogation begins. The suspect listens, expression guarded, as detectives lay out what they have. Not everything, just enough. They talk about the past as if it's a place you can return to, as if memory is a door waiting to be opened. The suspect denies involvement, insists on innocence, points to the years that have passed as proof of impossibility. How could they remember every detail? How could anyone? But the questions keep coming. The inconsistencies are named now, no longer whispers. The object out of place. The timing that doesn't add up. The DNA that refuses to disappear. The suspect's confidence begins to fracture, not into confession, but into anger, frustration, fear. The detective watches closely, knowing this is not the end, only another threshold. News breaks by morning. Headlines explode across screens and front pages. Cold case cracked. Late night arrest. Community stunned. The town wakes to a story it thought it had buried. Families react with shock, relief, skepticism. The victim's name trends again, pulled back into the present with all its unresolved pain. For some, justice finally feels close. For others, the questions only deepen. Because an arrest is not an answer. It is a beginning. And as the suspect sits in a holding cell, staring at a wall they have never seen before, the case that slept for decades opens its eyes fully at last, ready to demand everything it was denied the first time around. The morning after the arrest does not bring clarity, only noise. Sirens fade, but speculation roars in their place, a constant hum of questions pouring out of television studios, radio shows, comment sections, and kitchen tables across the town. People wake up to headlines that feel unreal, as if someone has rewritten the past overnight. A name they barely remember is suddenly everywhere. A face they have passed on sidewalks is now framed in red banners and bold fonts. Cold case cracked, they read, and yet the words feel premature, fragile, like glass held too tightly. Inside the department, the mood is cautious. There is relief, yes, the kind that comes from movement after years of stillness, but also tension, thick and coiled. Detectives know this phase well. An arrest is the loudest moment in a case, but it is also the most dangerous. Every decision from here on out will be dissected. Every mistake will be amplified. The case that survived decades of silence could still collapse under the weight of expectation. The suspect's first night in custody passes without incident. No confession. No dramatic breakdown. Just hours of staring at cinderblock walls and fluorescent lights that never dim. When questioning resumes, the tone shifts. This is no longer exploratory. It is surgical. Investigators walk the suspect through timelines, asking them to place themselves in 1998 with specificity that memory resists. Where were you before sunset? Who did you speak to? What route did you take home? Each answer is compared against records, statements, fragments of the past pulled forward into the present. The suspect grows defensive. Time becomes their shield. They insist it was too long ago to remember details. They point out that no one can accurately recall an ordinary night from decades past. The argument is reasonable, almost persuasive. But then the detectives introduce the parts that are not ordinary, the inconsistencies that have survived time, the moments the suspect remembers too clearly, and the ones they avoid entirely. Memory, it turns out, can betray as much as it protects. Outside, the victim's family is thrust back into the spotlight they never wanted. Cameras gather. Microphones extend. Every word they speak is analyzed for signs of relief or doubt. They say they are grateful. They say they hope for justice. They say they are trying not to get their hopes up. Behind closed doors, emotions collide. Anger at the years lost. Fear of disappointment. A cautious, fragile hope that threatens to shatter under scrutiny. Defense attorneys move quickly. They remind anyone who will listen that an arrest is not a conviction. They emphasize the gaps, the reliance on new technology, the danger of retrofitting evidence to a narrative decades later. They talk about contamination, coincidence, the fallibility of memory. They plant seeds of doubt with careful precision, knowing that doubt is all they need. Prosecutors, meanwhile, assemble the story they believe has been waiting to be told. They line up evidence old and new, weaving forensic results with witness statements, building a timeline that finally makes sense. They argue that time did not weaken the case, it clarified it. That what once looked like chaos now reveals a pattern. But even as they speak with confidence, they know how thin the line is. Cold cases are unforgiving. Juries expect miracles. Anything less than certainty can feel like failure. As the legal process grinds forward, cracks begin to appear. A lab technician flags a procedural issue with one of the older samples. Minor, they say. Correctable. But defense seizes on it immediately, magnifying it into something larger, something corrosive. A hearing is scheduled. Arguments are made. The judge listens, expression unreadable. The case inches forward, then stalls, then moves again, never smoothly. Never without resistance. Journalists dig into the suspect's past, uncovering details that were never criminal, but now feel ominous under the harsh light of suspicion. Old disputes. Failed relationships. Moments of anger remembered differently now that they have context. Neighbors are interviewed. Former coworkers speak cautiously, careful not to overstate what they cannot prove. The portrait that emerges is not monstrous, but complicated, and that complexity fuels debate rather than settling it. Then, quietly, a witness comes forward. Not new, exactly. Someone who spoke briefly to police in 1998, then faded back into anonymity. Time has changed their perspective. Back then, they didn't think what they saw mattered. Now, with a name in custody and details resurfacing, memory sharpens into something closer to certainty. They recall a figure in the hallway, a voice, a moment that felt wrong but passed too quickly to stop. Their statement is cautious, hedged, but it aligns with the prosecution's theory in a way that feels significant. Defense attacks the memory immediately. They call it contamination by media, the danger of suggestion, the unreliability of recollection after decades of silence. Experts are lined up, ready to explain how memory reshapes itself, how confidence does not equal accuracy. The courtroom becomes a battleground of perception, where truth is less important than what can be convincingly argued. Behind the scenes, Investigators revisit every step they took after the arrest, searching for vulnerabilities. Did they push too hard? Did they assume too much? Did confirmation bias creep in when they finally had a suspect to hold on to? Doubt is not just for defense. It haunts everyone involved, a low-level anxiety that hums beneath the surface of each decision. The suspect maintains innocence. Calm in public, volatile in private. In recorded calls, their tone shifts, anger flaring at the injustice of it all, fear slipping through in unguarded moments. They complain about being misunderstood, about a system eager to close a case regardless of truth. They never confess. They never slip in the way investigators hope. The story remains intact, rigid, rehearsed. As months pass, public opinion fractures. Some believe the case is finally solved, that science succeeded where time failed. Others see a rush to judgment, a convenient target chosen to satisfy a community tired of waiting. Online forums fill with amateur analysis, timelines annotated, evidence debated by strangers who feel certain they see what professionals missed. The case becomes less about one night in 1998 and more about trust in technology, in institutions, in the idea that justice can survive delay. Then comes the setback. No one wants. A motion is granted. Certain evidence will be limited at trial. Not excluded entirely, but constrained enough to weaken its impact. The ruling sends a ripple through the prosecution team. Strategies are revised. Emphasis shifts. The narrative must be adjusted, trimmed, sharpened. The margin for error narrows. In the quiet moments, detectives return to the original scene, mentally if not physically. They replay it again, the room, the silence, the feeling that something essential was missing. They wonder if the arrest answered the wrong question. Not who could have done this, but who actually did. The difference matters more now than ever. The town waits. The family waits. The suspect waits. Time stretches, elastic and cruel, echoing the decades already lost. The cold case that was declared cracked now teeters on the edge of something else entirely, something unresolved, something dangerous. Because the closer it comes to resolution, the more fragile the truth appears, and the possibility grows that this story, after all this movement, may still refuse to end. The courtroom air is heavy long before anyone speaks, dense with the expectation that something permanent might happen inside these walls. Wooden benches creak under the weight of bodies leaning forward, strangers united by curiosity and a need to witness what justice looks like after waiting this long. The judge takes the bench. The attorneys rise. The case number is read aloud, and with it, the past is formally invited into the present. The prosecution begins carefully, aware that every word must earn its place. They paint the picture slowly, methodically, taking the jury back to a California night in 1998, to a quiet apartment, to a life interrupted. They do not dramatize. They let the facts speak, or at least try to. Photographs appear on screens, muted by time, but no less unsettling. The jurors watch, some blinking hard, others staring without expression, absorbing images that have lived in files for decades. Witnesses are called. The early ones are procedural, voices steady, recounting what was done, when and by whom. Evidence handling. Chain of custody. The architecture of an investigation laid bare. The goal is reassurance. This was done right. This was done carefully. But the defense listens closely, noting every hesitation, every, as far as I recall, every reminder that time erodes certainty. When forensic testimony begins, the room shifts. Science carries authority, even when it speaks softly. An expert explains DNA, partial profiles, probabilities that feel abstract until translated into human terms. The match is strong, they say. Not perfect, but compelling. The odds of coincidence are slim. Heads nod. Pens move. For a moment, the case feels solid, almost inevitable. Then cross-examination. The defense approaches with measured calm, dismantling confidence piece by piece. They ask about degradation, about storage conditions, about evolving standards. They ask whether procedures from the late 90s meet today's expectations, whether assumptions made then could have shaped outcomes now. The expert answers honestly, and honesty introduces uncertainty. Not enough to destroy the evidence, but enough to weaken its spine. The witness, who came forward later, takes the stand next. They look older than their memory feels, hands clasped tightly, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. They describe the hallway, the figure, the feeling that something was wrong. The prosecution listens with relief. This is the human thread, the connective tissue between science and story. But the defense is ready. They ask why the witness waited. Why this memory surfaced only after headlines and arrests. They ask about media exposure, about conversations with friends, about how memory can be reshaped without permission. The witness insists they are telling the truth as they remember it. The jury watches closely, aware that truth and memory are not always the same thing. As days pass, the rhythm of the trial settles in.
Testimony.
Objections. Sidebars whispered just out of reach. Each side builds its version of events, parallel narratives competing for belief. The prosecution's story is one of patience rewarded, of technology finally catching up to a crime that tried to outrun it. The defense's story is one of overreach, of a system desperate to close a chapter no matter the cost. Outside the courtroom, the town holds its breath. Conversations lower when the case is mentioned. Opinions harden. Friendships strain under disagreement. For the victim's family, every day of testimony reopens wounds they learned to live with but never healed. They sit together, hands intertwined, listening to strangers debate the final moments of someone they loved. The suspect watches it all from behind the defense table, expression carefully controlled. Occasionally, they lean in to whisper to their attorney. Occasionally, they stare straight ahead, eyes unfocused, as if watching something only they can see. When photographs are shown, they do not look away. When testimony becomes uncomfortable, they shift slightly, a movement so small it might be meaningless or might be everything. The defense presents its case with quiet confidence. They call experts of their own, voices smooth, credentials impressive. They talk about false positives, about statistical misunderstanding, about the dangers of letting probability masquerade as certainty. They remind the jury that doubt is not failure, that the burden is heavy by design. They emphasize the absence of a confession, the lack of direct physical evidence tying the suspect to the act itself. They highlight what is missing. No eyewitness to the crime. No weapon recovered. No clear motive that explains why this person, on this night, would commit such an act. They suggest alternative possibilities without naming them outright, shadows left intentionally vague. The implication is enough. If it could have been someone else, it must not be this person. Closing arguments approach, and with them, a sense of finality that feels premature. The prosecution speaks of responsibility, of not letting time erase accountability. They urge the jury to see the case as a whole, not as isolated doubts, but as a pattern that points in one direction. They ask for trust, not in perfection but in reason. The defense counters with restraint. They do not need to prove innocence, they remind the jury. They only need to show that certainty is out of reach. They speak of the danger of filling gaps with assumptions, of the irreversible nature of conviction. They ask the jury to imagine the weight of being wrong after so many years. When the jury is sent to deliberate, the room exhales. Weeks of tension compress into hours of waiting. No one knows how long it will take. Some jurors avoid eye contact as they leave. Others glance briefly at the family, the suspect, the lawyers, carrying the weight of decision with them. The weight is unbearable. Every passing minute stretches the nerves thinner. In quiet corners of the courthouse, people speculate in hushed tones. In the jury room, discussions grow heated, then calm, then tense again. Votes are taken, changed, taken again. Doubt refuses to settle. And when the jury finally returns, faces drawn, movements slow, the silence is complete. The verdict is read, words measured, careful. Not guilty, or guilty, or something that refuses to fully satisfy either side. The reaction is immediate and uneven.
Gasps. Tears.
Stillness. Whatever the outcome, one truth becomes unavoidable as the courtroom empties and the case steps back into the world. The verdict has spoken, but it has not answered everything. The cold case may have been cracked open, examined under harsh light, but something essential remains elusive, slipping through the cracks of law and logic. Outside, the sun sets over the same town that once believed the story would never move again. And in its fading light, the question lingers, heavier than any ruling, quieter than any headline. Did justice finally arrive, or did the past simply change its shape, leaving the mystery intact, waiting for the next time someone dares to pull the file from the shelf? The verdict does not end the story, it only changes its temperature. The courtroom empties, but the case does not leave with the people. It lingers in the hallways, in the echo of footsteps and the smell of old paper and disinfectant, in the way conversations stop abruptly when someone mentions 1998. Outside, cameras scramble to capture reactions, faces tight with emotion, statements carefully chosen to sound composed while everything underneath trembles. Justice has spoken, officially, but the words feel incomplete, like a sentence cut short. For the victim's family, there is no clean emotional landing. If the verdict brings relief, it is fragile, threaded with exhaustion and doubt. If it brings disappointment, it reopens a wound that never closed, confirming the fear that the truth may never fully surface. They return home to a house that remembers grief too well, where photographs on the walls seem to watch quietly as time passes without answers. They have learned how to survive uncertainty, but survival is not the same as peace. The suspect walks free, or is led away, depending on the outcome, but either way, they do not return to the life they had before. Their name is now fused to the case, searchable, permanent. Even if legally cleared, the shadow remains. Neighbors look differently. Old friends hesitate. Every interaction carries the weight of what might have been done, or what might have been wrongly believed. The past has branded them, and no verdict can fully erase that mark. Inside the police department, the case becomes a quiet obsession. Detectives replay every choice, every assumption, every turn they took once the file was reopened. They ask themselves whether they followed the evidence, or whether the pressure to finally resolve the cold case pushed them toward a conclusion too eagerly. Confirmation bias becomes more than a theory. It becomes a personal accusation they cannot stop interrogating. Evidence is returned to storage, but not with the same finality as before. The boxes feel heavier now, as if they carry not just facts but consequences. Notes are added, margins filled, questions written in sharper ink. The case is technically closed again, but no one says the words out loud. They have learned how misleading closure can be. Journalists move on, slowly. The headlines fade, replaced by newer crises, fresher scandals. But some reporters cannot let go. They dig deeper, filing public records requests, tracking down forgotten witnesses, revisiting the town with different questions than before. They notice things that didn't make it into the trial. Leads that were deprioritized. Names that appeared briefly, then vanished from the narrative. The story, they realize, may have been simplified for court. In the community, the case fractures into versions. There is the official version, preserved in transcripts and rulings. There is the version people tell each other in private, shaped by rumor and intuition. And then there is the version that lives inside those closest to the truth, fragmented, incomplete, stubbornly resistant to organization. Each version feels real to the people who carry it. Years pass again, quieter this time, but not silent. Advances in forensic science continue, indifferent to old verdicts. Databases expand. Algorithms improve. What was once untestable becomes possible. A new generation of investigators, removed emotionally from the original drama, stumbles upon the case during training, intrigued by its contradictions. They ask questions without the weight of past failures, without loyalty to earlier conclusions. One of them notices something small, buried deep in supplemental reports. A detail dismissed early on, not because it was disproven, but because it did not fit. A lead that pointed away from the eventual suspect toward a different possibility entirely. It involves a timeline discrepancy, a person placed near the scene who is never fully accounted for, someone who had no obvious connection to the victim, but also no solid alibi. The name is unfamiliar to most. It appears only a handful of times in the file, mentioned by a witness who was later deemed unreliable. At the time, investigators had stronger directions to pursue, and this one faded. Now, reading it decades later, stripped of urgency and expectation, the detail feels different. Not explosive, just quietly persistent. The investigator brings it up cautiously. No one wants to reopen wounds, or worse, admit that the wrong path may have been followed. But the question hangs there, unignorable. What if the case was never about choosing between guilt and innocence of one person, but about missing someone else entirely? Permission is granted to look again, unofficially at first. Records are pulled. Old addresses traced. The name leads to a life that drifted in and out of the area around the time of the murder, then disappeared. No criminal record of note. No obvious red flags. Just movement, instability, and a pattern of proximity that feels uncomfortable in retrospect. Attempts to locate the person begin quietly. Some addresses are dead ends. Some phone numbers disconnected long ago. Eventually, a lead surfaces, placing them in another state, living under a slightly altered name, a common enough change to escape notice but not scrutiny. The investigator feels the familiar tightening in the chest, the sensation that comes when possibility starts to feel real. A request is made to compare DNA, but there's a problem. No sample exists in any database. No arrest. No conviction. No reason for it to be there. The process stalls, frustratingly dependent on chance. Unless the person leaves something behind, the truth remains just out of reach. And then chance intervenes, as it so often does. A minor incident, a traffic stop, a discarded item collected routinely, processed without awareness of its potential. The system flags a partial match, weak but suggestive, linking back to the old profile from 1998. Not strong enough to accuse. Strong enough to question everything. The news does not break this time. No headlines. No press conference. The investigation unfolds in silence, shaped by caution learned the hard way. The person is contacted, interviewed under a different pretext. They are cooperative, relaxed, seemingly unconcerned. But when the conversation drifts toward the late 90s, toward California, something shifts. A flicker, a pause, a change in rhythm too subtle to call proof, too sharp to ignore. The investigator leaves the meeting unsettled. They know this feeling. It is the same one described by detectives who worked the original scene, the sense that the truth is close but angled away, visible only from certain positions. They document everything, aware that reopening the case officially would require more than instinct. As pieces align slowly, painfully, a terrifying possibility emerges. What if the cold case was cracked in the wrong direction? What if the arrest, the trial, the verdict were not the culmination of justice, but a detour? The thought is dangerous, destabilizing. It threatens not just one case, but faith in the entire process. The victim's family is not told. Not yet. The weight of uncertainty has already cost them too much. The investigator wrestles with the ethics of knowing something without being able to act on it. They understand now why cold cases haunt the people who touch them. Not because they are unsolved, but because they resist certainty even when answers seem close. Late at night, the file is opened again, pages spread out across a desk much like they were decades earlier. Names circled, lines drawn, possibilities mapped. The story reshapes itself, not into something clearer, but into something more honest. Messy, inconclusive, alive. Somewhere out there, the truth exists, intact and indifferent, waiting to be recognized. And until it is, the case remains what it has always been beneath every headline and ruling. A mystery, a wound, a question that refuses to stay buried, whispering through time, reminding everyone who listens that justice is not a moment, but a struggle, and some stories are not finished simply because the world grows tired of hearing them. The quiet investigation does not announce itself. It moves the way doubt does, slowly, privately, reshaping certainty from the inside. No task force is formed. No press is notified. Only a handful of people know the file is open again, and even they speak about it in careful language, as if naming it too loudly might collapse what little progress has been made. The case has learned to punish confidence. The new lead is handled delicately, almost apologetically. Records are requested under unrelated justifications. Old travel logs are reconstructed from fragments, credit card receipts, employment stubs, anything that might place a body in a space at a specific time. It is tedious work, stripped of drama, but every small confirmation feels like oxygen. The person of interest's movements in the late 90s begin to form a pattern, incomplete but suggestive, orbiting the same geographic edges as the victim's life. One detail stands out: a brief overlap, a window of time narrow enough to matter. The person was in the area, closer than previously believed, close enough to explain a presence that never made sense before. No one celebrates the discovery. Celebration implies certainty, and certainty has betrayed this case too many times. Interviews expand quietly. People who knew the person back then are located, some surprised to be contacted at all. They speak cautiously, memories dulled by years and disinterest. Most recall nothing remarkable. A few hesitate, searching for words that won't incriminate but won't lie. One mentions a temper, controlled but volatile. Another remembers sudden departures, unexplained absences. None of it is criminal. All of it is unsettling when placed beside a violent death. The investigator begins to notice how differently this path feels. There is no rush, no hunger for resolution, only an obligation to follow the questions wherever they lead, even if they circle back to uncomfortable places. Especially then. The case has already proven how dangerous it can be to stop asking. Forensic reanalysis becomes the next barrier. The original evidence is finite, fragile. Every test risks consuming what little remains. Experts debate options, weighing potential gain against irreversible loss. The decision is made to proceed with extreme caution, using the most advanced techniques available, methods that did not exist even a decade earlier. Samples are handled like relics, each movement deliberate, documented, reverent. While the lab works, the investigator reviews the trial transcripts again, this time with new eyes. Statements that once felt conclusive now read differently. Arguments that seemed strong reveal hairline fractures. The defense's warnings echo louder than before. Not because they were right necessarily, but because they understood something fundamental about uncertainty. The prosecution's narrative, once so persuasive, now feels narrow, a single track laid over a terrain that demanded exploration. A troubling realization begins to take shape. The case may not be a matter of choosing the correct suspect, but of acknowledging that the truth is more complex than a courtroom can accommodate. There may have been more than one person involved. More than one moment that mattered. The crime scene, so clean, so resistant to interpretation, begins to look less like simplicity and more like intention. Late one evening, the lab calls. Not with confirmation. Not with absolution. With ambiguity. The results suggest a secondary profile, faint but present, previously overshadowed by stronger signals. It cannot be identified yet. It cannot stand alone. But it exists. Proof that the story is not finished speaking. The investigator feels the familiar tightening return, sharper this time. This is the kind of detail that changes everything quietly, without permission. They request further analysis, knowing it may take months, knowing patience is the only currency left. The case demands endurance, not urgency. Meanwhile, the person of interest is watched, discreetly. Not surveillance in the cinematic sense. No tail cars. No hidden cameras. Just awareness. Public records monitored. Digital footprints observed where legally accessible. The goal is not to catch, but to understand. Behavior over time reveals patterns that single moments cannot. The person lives an unremarkable life.
Stable job.
Predictable routines. No visible cracks. And yet, when certain dates approach, anniversaries marked only by those who remember, subtle changes appear. A day off taken without explanation. A trip planned abruptly. These shifts are slight, easy to dismiss, but they recur with uncomfortable consistency. The investigator documents everything, resisting the urge to interpret too soon. Interpretation is where mistakes are born. Instead, they focus on accumulation, letting the weight of detail build naturally. The file grows again, thicker, heavier, but this time without the illusion of clarity. Ethical questions loom. If the wrong person was accused, tried, and judged, what responsibility does the system bear now? Is truth still justice if it arrives too late to correct past harm? The investigator wrestles with these thoughts in silence, aware that answers, if they come at all, will not be clean. At home, sleep becomes fragmented. The case seeps into dreams, not as images of violence, but as paperwork, corridors, doors that almost open. The mind searches for resolution even when the world refuses to provide it. This is the hidden cost of cold cases, the way they colonize thought, demanding attention long after official interest fades. Another interview is scheduled with a person of interest, this time direct, transparent. They agree readily, almost eagerly. The conversation is polite, professional. They answer questions without hesitation, offering context, explanations, even jokes. But when confronted gently with inconsistencies in their past movements, the air shifts. Not dramatically, just enough. They explain the overlap as coincidence. They acknowledge being nearby, but deny any connection to the victim. Their voice remains steady. Their eyes do not. They blink more often. Their hands clasp, unclasp. The investigator notes it all, careful not to assign meaning prematurely. The interview ends without confrontation. No accusations. No warnings. Just a handshake and a sense of unfinished business. As the door closes, the investigator knows something irreversible has begun. Not an arrest, not a trial, but a narrowing of possibility. Back at the office, the file is updated again. Two suspects now exist in parallel, neither fully resolved, neither dismissible. The case sits in an uncomfortable middle ground, resisting labels. It is not solved. It is not unsolved. It is something worse. Unstable. The investigator understands now why some cases never truly close. Not because the truth is inaccessible, but because it refuses to fit the shapes designed to contain it. Law, procedure, narrative, all struggle against reality's irregular edges. As night settles in, the file remains open on the desk, illuminated by a single lamp. The pages whisper with overlapping stories, competing possibilities, and the quiet insistence that the past is not finished with the present. Somewhere between what is known and what is provable, the answer waits, patient and indifferent, while those who seek it learn the hardest lesson of all. That solving a cold case is not about finding certainty. It is about learning how to live with the absence of it, while still refusing to stop looking. The deeper the investigation drifts into uncertainty, the more the past begins to feel alive. Not in a dramatic way, not as a revelation or a breakthrough, but as a presence, subtle and persistent, pressing in from the edges of every decision. The case no longer feels like history. It feels like something unfinished, something watching. Pressure builds quietly, not from the public, which remains unaware, but from within the system itself. Files that reopen without official sanction make people nervous. Questions without answers invite scrutiny. Supervisors ask for updates framed as casual curiosity, their tone neutral, but their eyes sharp. Everyone understands the risk. To continue means admitting that the previous resolution may have been incomplete. To stop means accepting that truth might be sacrificed for stability. The investigator chooses neither. They continue carefully, deliberately, balancing progress against restraint. This is no longer about speed. It is about survival, of the case and of credibility. The secondary DNA profile becomes the axis around which everything turns. Experts revisit it again and again, applying newer techniques, adjusting parameters, pushing boundaries without crossing them. The profile remains elusive, stubbornly partial, but it carries weight. It proves presence. It proves proximity. It proves that the scene was not as singular as once believed. The implications ripple outward. If more than one person was present, then timelines change. Motives shift. The clean simplicity of the original narrative fractures into something far more complex. Investigators sketch scenarios on whiteboards late into the night, erasing and rewriting possibilities that refuse to stabilize. Some theories implicate cooperation. Others suggest coincidence. None feel complete. The person of interest becomes aware of the attention if they were not already. They grow more guarded, conversations shorter, humor replaced with formality. They ask questions now. Not accusations, just clarifications. Why now? Why this again? The investigator answers truthfully without revealing intent. Because something doesn't fit. Because it never did. At the same time, the original suspect, long entangled in the case, reacts differently. Through attorneys, through intermediaries, they push back against renewed scrutiny. They remind authorities of verdicts, of finality, of legal boundaries. Their stance is aggressive, almost desperate, as if the mere existence of doubt threatens something deeper than reputation. This contrast does not go unnoticed. Guilt does not have a single expression, the investigator knows that, but fear has patterns. One kind of fear avoids attention. Another challenges it. A breakthrough comes not from science, but from paper. An old utility record surfaces, overlooked because it seemed irrelevant at the time. A service call logged near the apartment complex on the night of the murder. A technician. A van. A presence that was explained away as routine. The name on the form matches neither suspect, but it intersects with the person of interest timeline in a way that tightens the knot. The investigator tracks the technician down, now retired, memory hazy but not empty. He recalls the night vaguely. A delay. A conversation that felt uncomfortable. Someone else nearby who shouldn't have been. He cannot identify faces. He cannot swear to times. But his recollection adds texture where there was once only blank space. Layer by layer, the case becomes less about certainty and more about probability. Not the kind that satisfies courts, but the kind that haunts investigators. The sense that the truth is close enough to touch, yet angled just beyond reach. Internal debates grow sharper. Some argue the case should remain buried. That reopening it risks chaos without guarantee. Others believe that even an incomplete truth is better than a comfortable lie. The investigator listens, says little, continues working. Sleep becomes optional. Meals are skipped. The mind loops endlessly through scenarios, replaying evidence like a film stuck between frames. In quieter moments, the investigator wonders whether obsession has replaced objectivity, whether the case has become a mirror reflecting their own need for resolution. The question is dangerous but necessary. Another forensic update arrives. Incremental, technical, but it confirms something crucial. The secondary profile shares no genetic relationship with the original suspect.
None.
The implication lands hard. Whatever happened in that apartment involved someone else, someone not accounted for in the trial, someone the system never fully saw. This time, the finding cannot be ignored.
It is documented. Logged.
Shared with supervisors. The response is muted but unmistakable. Concern replaces curiosity. Meetings are scheduled. Language becomes cautious. Words like review and assessment appear where conclusion once stood. The victim's family is informed that new information has emerged. Not details. Just enough to prepare them for uncertainty returning in a form they never wanted. Their reaction is a quiet devastation. Not anger. Not hope. Just exhaustion. They have lived too long with questions to greet them with surprise. The investigator meets with them privately, explains as much as they can without promising anything they cannot deliver. They listen. They nod. They ask one question that cuts deeper than any accusation. Why did it take so long? There is no good answer. Only the truth. Because sometimes the tools arrive too late. Because sometimes the wrong questions are asked first. Because certainty can be more seductive than doubt. As the case edges closer to an official review, the investigator feels the ground shift beneath them. This is no longer a personal pursuit. It is becoming institutional again, with all the weight and resistance that implies. The window for quiet progress narrows. The person of interest disappears briefly. Not vanished, not missing, just unavailable. A trip taken without notice. A phone unanswered. It lasts only a few days, but it is enough to accelerate concern. When they return, they offer explanations that fit just well enough to avoid challenge. The pattern repeats.
Proximity.
Absence.
Return.
The investigator updates the file one more time, aware that soon it may no longer be theirs to control. The case has reached a point of no return. Either it will be reopened fully, with all the consequences that entails, or it will be sealed again, heavier than before. Late at night, alone in the office, the investigator reads the original incident report again. The first description of the scene. The first assumptions. The first mistakes. They realize something then, quietly, without drama. The case was never cold because it lacked evidence. It was cold because the truth was inconvenient. As dawn approaches, the city outside remains unaware of the storm gathering beneath its surface. Traffic moves. Coffee shops open. Life continues, indifferent to the fact that a story it thought was finished is about to demand attention again. And somewhere, connected by timelines and choices and chance, the person who knows exactly what happened in that apartment in 1998 wakes up to another ordinary day, unaware or pretending to be, that the distance between past and present is collapsing, and the silence that protected them for so long is beginning to crack. The reopening is not announced with sirens or headlines. It arrives as a memo, circulated quietly, its language cautious, deliberate, almost apologetic. Words like review, reconsideration, procedural integrity soften what it truly means. The case is no longer settled. The ground beneath it is officially unstable. For those who have lived with its weight, the shift feels seismic. Meetings multiply. Conference rooms fill with people who were not there in 1998, who did not walk the scene or knock on doors or promise answers they could not deliver. They bring fresh eyes and clean hands, but also distance. They speak in frameworks and risk assessments, in implications and exposure. The case is no longer just about truth. It is about consequence. The investigator presents the findings without embellishment. The secondary DNA profile. The lack of genetic connection to the original suspect. The overlooked timelines. The person of interest whose proximity grows harder to dismiss. Each point lands with quiet force. No one interrupts. Silence does the work. Legal counsel weighs in next.
Carefully.
Reopening a case like this invites scrutiny not just of evidence, but of process. Mistakes made years ago become liabilities now. The possibility of wrongful accusation, or worse, wrongful conviction, looms like a shadow across the table. The room shifts from curiosity to concern. Outside these walls, the victim's family waits again. They have learned to recognize the sound of delayed answers, the way officials speak when they are unsure of what comes next. They brace themselves instinctively for disappointment. Hope has become something they ration carefully. The person of interest is contacted formally this time. No pretext. No casual tone. The request for another interview is explicit. Serious. Unavoidable. They comply, but the ease is gone. Their posture is rigid. Their words precise. The investigator notices how often they reference legal boundaries, how frequently they ask what is required of them. Cooperation has become calculation. The interview stretches longer than planned. Timelines are revisited with specificity that allows no room for vagueness. The investigator presents evidence incrementally, watching reactions closely. When the overlap is mentioned again, the window of time that places them near the apartment, the person of interest exhales slowly, as if conceding ground. They admit being closer than previously stated. They explain it as coincidence, a detour, a night that blurred with others. The explanation is plausible, almost too much so. It fills the space neatly, leaving no loose ends. That, too, is a red flag. The secondary DNA profile is mentioned, not as an accusation, but as a fact. The reaction is immediate. A flicker of something unguarded crosses their face before discipline returns. They ask questions now about probability, about contamination, about how such a profile could exist without meaning involvement. The investigator answers calmly, truthfully. It means presence. Nothing more, nothing less. After the interview, the silence feels heavier than before. The investigator knows they are closer to something irreversible. The question is no longer whether the past was misunderstood, but whether the present is prepared to confront it. Forensic teams push further, extracting every possible fragment of information from what remains. The secondary profile strengthens slightly. Not enough for identification. Enough to confirm persistence. It was not incidental. It did not drift in from nowhere. It belonged to someone who mattered in that room. The review board convenes. Closed session. Voices rise, then settle. The debate is fierce but controlled. Reopening the case publicly would mean acknowledging failure. Not reopening it would mean accepting the possibility of injustice. Neither option is clean. Neither is safe. A decision is made, narrow but significant. The case will be reopened for investigative purposes only. No announcements. No charges. Just permission to pursue the truth without pretending it has already been found. The investigator feels the weight shift again, heavier now but clearer. This is the moment cold cases rarely reach. Not resolution. Reckoning. The person of interest is placed under discreet surveillance, this time with authorization. Patterns are tracked more closely. Communications analyzed. Movements logged. Nothing dramatic happens. No panic. No flight. Just an increasing tightness, a sense that the ordinary is being performed rather than lived. Then something breaks. Not loudly. Quietly. A digital record surfaces, buried deep in archived service provider logs. A short call. Late at night. The night of the murder. A number traced not to the victim, not to the original suspect, but to the person of interest. The call lasted less than a minute. Its content unknown. Its existence undeniable. The investigator stares at the screen, feeling the air leave the room. This is not proof of guilt, but it is connection. A thread that ties the person of interest directly to the timeline in a way nothing else has. When confronted with it, the person of interest struggles for the first time. They say they don't remember the call. They say it could have been a wrong number. They say it means nothing. The words come faster now, less controlled. The investigator does not press. The silence does enough. Behind closed doors, legal teams reassess everything. The possibility of new charges is discussed in hypotheticals and conditional clauses. The bar is high, higher than ever. The past has taught them caution. The victim's family is told more this time. Not everything, but enough to understand that the story they were given may not be the full one. The revelation lands hard. Grief resurfaces, sharpened by anger, by the knowledge that time was lost chasing certainty instead of truth. They ask if there will be justice. The investigator answers honestly. They say they don't know. The family nods. They have lived with that answer longer than anyone else. As word begins to leak, carefully, incompletely, the community senses movement. Whispers replace headlines. Speculation returns, quieter but more intense. The case that once shocked them awake is stirring again, threatening to rewrite everything they thought they understood. The investigator works late into the night, compiling reports that feel less like conclusions and more like confessions. The file has become a living document, responsive, mutable, refusing to settle. Somewhere between the evidence and the unanswered questions, a shape begins to form. Not a face, not a name, but a narrative that finally accounts for what never fit before. And as dawn approaches once more, the case stands at the edge of something dangerous and necessary. The possibility that justice, delayed and distorted, might still be reachable, or that the truth, once revealed, will be so uncomfortable that no verdict could ever contain it. Either way, the silence that protected the past is gone now. And whatever comes next will not be quiet. When the leak finally surfaces, it does not explode. It seeps. A line buried in a regional paper. A cautious segment at the end of a late-night broadcast. Phrases like reviewed evidence and new developments appear without detail, but they are enough. The town feels it immediately, the old unease rising like a familiar ache. The case is back, not as spectacle, but as a question no one can ignore. Inside the department, the atmosphere tightens. Every email is measured. Every conversation assumes an audience. The investigator feels the weight of visibility pressed down, the knowledge that quiet progress has given way to public consequence. This is the point where cases either harden into certainty or fracture under scrutiny. The person of interest hires counsel. Not defensive, not aggressive.
Strategic.
The attorney speaks of cooperation while drawing careful boundaries, reminding everyone that review is not accusation and suspicion is not proof. The tone is calm, almost reassuring, and that calm unsettles more than outrage ever could. Surveillance continues. Patterns persist. The late-night call becomes the axis of analysis, examined from every angle. Who initiated it? Where it originated? Why it ended so quickly? The phone itself is long gone, replaced, recycled into the digital void. Only the record remains, a fossilized trace of intent without context. The investigator revisits the apartment complex again, this time with fresh eyes and a different map of possibility. The hallway the witness described. The angles cameras didn't cover. The places a person could stand unseen. The crime scene begins to breathe differently now, no longer singular, no longer static. It suggests movement, coordination, timing. Another witness emerges, not from memory, but from necessity. A former resident, now elderly, reaches out after seeing the news. They had dismissed the case years ago, assumed it was resolved. Now, they say, something bothers them. They recall a knock on their door that night.
Late.
Brief. A man asking if they had seen anyone unusual. They thought it was police. It wasn't. The description is vague.
Tall.
Neutral clothing. Unremarkable. But the timing aligns, and the question itself feels wrong. Who asks for witnesses before anyone knows a crime has occurred? The witness is cautious, afraid of being wrong, of becoming part of something they don't fully understand. The investigator listens, asks only what is necessary, documents everything. Another thread, thin but persistent, joins the weave. Internal pressure mounts. The review board wants clarity. Prosecutors want to know whether this path leads to something actionable or merely philosophical. The distinction matters. One reshapes lives. The other reshapes narratives. Both carry risk. The investigator presents the accumulation not as a solution, but as a problem too significant to ignore. The secondary DNA, the phone call, the overlapping timelines, the unaccounted-for presence, the pattern of absence and return. No single element convicts. Together, they refuse to be dismissed. A decision is made to pursue a warrant for a DNA sample from the person of interest. The legal standard is debated word by word. Probable cause is a fragile bridge here, built over years of error and restraint. Eventually, the judge signs. The moment is quiet, anticlimactic, but irreversible. The collection is procedural.
Swab.
Seal. Signature. The person of interest remains composed, almost relieved, as if clarity of any kind is preferable to this prolonged ambiguity. The investigator watches closely, searching for something that does not appear. The wait for results is unbearable. Time stretches into a taut wire, vibrating with anticipation. Everyone involved understands what is at stake. Not just a case, but credibility. Lives shaped by earlier decisions. The meaning of justice itself. When the call comes, it does not deliver absolution or certainty. It delivers convergence. The DNA aligns with the secondary profile. Not conclusively, not with the force of a confession, but strongly enough to matter, strongly enough to rewrite the case file in permanent ink. The room goes quiet. This is the threshold investigators fear and crave, the moment when doubt crystallizes into direction. The investigator feels no triumph, only gravity. Every step forward now will carry weight far beyond this room. The person of interest is brought in again, this time with the knowledge that the conversation has changed. The investigator lays out the findings slowly, without accusation, without drama. The alignment, the call, the witness, the patterns. The silence afterward is long. When the person of interest speaks, their voice is steady, but something underneath has shifted. They do not deny being present anymore. They contextualize it. They speak of a chance encounter, of fear, of making a mistake and choosing silence. They stop short of confession, but they cross a line they can never return from. The investigator listens, heart pounding, knowing this is not enough. Not yet. The law demands more than implication, more than narrative. It demands proof that survives opposition. The interview ends with no arrest, not because the moment isn't ripe, but because ripeness here is deceptive. The wrong move could collapse everything. News of the DNA alignment leaks despite efforts to contain it. This time, the reaction is sharper. Outrage, confusion, anger at the possibility that the wrong person was held accountable while the truth waited patiently in the margins. The town fractures again, old debates reignited with new urgency. The victim's family receives the update in person. The investigator does not soften it. They deserve the truth, even when it hurts. The family listens, faces drawn, eyes tired. One of them asks if this means they have to start over. The investigator does not answer immediately, then says yes. In some ways, you always do. Behind the scenes, prosecutors prepare for an unthinkable scenario, the possibility of vacating outcomes, of reopening wounds legally sealed, of standing in front of a court and admitting that certainty came too soon. It is a professional nightmare. It is also an ethical imperative. The original suspect, long tethered to the case, responds with fury. Statements are issued. Lawsuits threatened. The sense of betrayal is palpable. Whether guilty or not, their life was shaped by the accusation, and now that shape is being questioned. The system's failure, if it exists, cuts in multiple directions. The investigator stands between these worlds, the past and the future, the known and the suspected. They understand now that this case will not end cleanly. There will be no moment when all questions are answered and everyone agrees. There will only be choices and consequences and the quiet knowledge that doing nothing is itself a decision. As preparations begin for the next phase, the investigator returns to the original scene one last time. The building has changed. New paint, new tenants. The hallway feels narrower than memory suggests. They stand there, imagining the night again, not as it was told, but as it might have been. More than one presence, more than one silence. A moment where a choice was made, and another choice followed, and the truth slipped between them. The case, once frozen, now burns. Not with certainty, but with urgency. And as the city settles into another night, unaware of how close it is to reckoning, the investigator knows that whatever comes next will not be a resolution. It will be an accounting. And not everyone will survive it unchanged. The night after the accounting begins is sleepless, not just for the investigator, but for everyone now tethered to the case. Phones stay charged. Notifications are checked compulsively. Silence no longer feels neutral. It feels loaded, as if every quiet moment is storing energy for something violent and irreversible. This is the phase no one prepares for, when the truth is close enough to wound but not close enough to heal. Prosecutors move with visible hesitation. Meetings stretch longer. Language becomes surgical. They no longer ask whether there is a case, but whether there should be one. The difference matters. The evidence against the person of interest is real now, tangible, defensible, yet it exists in the shadow of a past prosecution that may have gone too far. Any move forward risks confirming what the system fears most, That certainty was chosen over accuracy. The investigator feels the tension sharpen. Every memo they write sounds like an accusation, even when it is not. Every omission feels like complicity. They are no longer just building a case. They are navigating a moral minefield laid over decades of institutional memory. The person of interest changes behavior again.
Subtly.
A different commute. Longer gaps between appearances. A careful withdrawal from routines that once felt automatic. Not flight, but preparation. The kind that suggests awareness without panic. When questioned, they offer explanations that are technically sound, emotionally hollow. They know the line. They're staying just behind it. A second interview is scheduled, this one under formal caution. The tone is different from the moment it begins. No small talk. No easing in. The investigator lays out the accumulated narrative, not as a story, but as a sequence of facts that refuse to sit apart any longer. The secondary DNA. The late-night call. The witness at the door. The utility van. The admitted presence. This time, the person of interest does not interrupt. They listen. When they speak, their voice is lower, slower. They talk about fear, about making a bad decision, and letting it grow heavier with every year of silence. They insist they did not kill anyone. They insist they left before things went wrong. They say the guilt they carry is not the guilt everyone thinks it is. The investigator hears it clearly. Partial truth. The most dangerous kind. Pressed gently but firmly, the person of interest describes another presence. Not a name. Not yet. Just a suggestion. Someone else in the apartment. Someone volatile. Someone they did not expect to lose control. The account is vague, careful, designed to share responsibility without claiming it. The investigator does not challenge it immediately. They let the words exist, knowing how fragile first admissions can be. When the interview ends, nothing is signed. Nothing is resolved. But the case has crossed another invisible threshold. The possibility of a second actor is no longer theoretical. It has been spoken into the record, and that matters. The name, when it finally comes days later, arrives indirectly. A slip. A reference to an old dispute. A detail too specific to be coincidence. The investigator catches it instantly, the way you catch a dropped glass before it hits the floor. They do not react. They let the person of interest continue talking, unaware that the room has just changed. The name belongs to someone already familiar. Not a stranger. Not an unknown. Someone adjacent to the victim's life. Someone briefly examined and dismissed in 1998 because their chaos made them unreliable. Too unstable to trust. Too inconvenient to pursue. The kind of person cases quietly abandon. The file on this individual is thin but troubling. Violent outbursts. Substance abuse. A pattern of escalation followed by disappearance. At the time, there was no proof they were present that night. Now, the implication rewrites everything. The secondary DNA profile could belong to them. The clean scene could reflect panic, not precision. The investigator feels the weight of it settle in. This is the missing shape. Not an answer, but an explanation that finally accounts for the messiness the case resisted for decades. Efforts to locate the newly named individual begin immediately. They are not easy to find. They never were. Addresses overlap with shelters, short-term rentals, places designed to leave no trace. Eventually, a lead surfaces. A city.
A job.
A fragile thread of normalcy. Surveillance confirms it. The person exists.
Alive.
Aging. Still volatile, according to those around them. Still capable of disappearing. A warrant is requested. Not for arrest. Not yet. For questioning. For DNA. For presence. The judge reviews the request longer than expected, aware of the history pressing down on the paper. When approval is granted, it feels less like permission and more like burden. The contact is made in daylight. Public place. Minimal risk. The individual reacts with confusion first, then anger. Their denial is immediate, emotional, loud. They claim they barely knew the victim. They accuse the system of harassment. They threaten to leave, to call lawyers, to make noise. Then the DNA is mentioned. The shift is unmistakable. The bravado drains. The anger fractures into something smaller, sharper.
Fear.
They agree to the swab with visible reluctance, muttering that this is harassment, that it will prove nothing. The investigator says nothing. There is nothing left to say. The weight returns, heavier than before. This result will not just implicate or exonerate. It will reframe history. It will determine whether the last decade of belief was built on something solid or something convenient. When the lab calls, the investigator does not sit down. They already know this moment will not be gentle. The match is strong, stronger than anything seen before. The secondary profile aligns. Not partially, not suggestively, directly. The room feels too small for the truth it now contains. Everything accelerates. Warrants, briefings, notifications that can no longer be delayed. The person of interest is confronted with the result. They do not argue. They close their eyes. They nod once. Their silence is heavier than any confession. The newly identified suspect is taken into custody hours later. The arrest is tense, volatile, but controlled. As they are handcuffed, they shout that it was never supposed to go that far, that it was an accident, that someone else left them to deal with it. The words hang in the air, unrecorded by cameras, but burned into memory. The news breaks this time with force. Not celebration.
Shock.
Anger. Whiplash. Headlines struggle to keep up with the reality they are trying to explain. The town reels, forced to confront the possibility that the story it accepted was wrong in its most fundamental way. The victim's family is told everything. All of it. There is no soft version left. They listen silent, faces rigid. When the investigator finishes, no one speaks for a long time. Then one of them asks a question so simple it hurts. Why didn't anyone see this before? The investigator has no answer that does not sound like an apology. As the night closes in again, the case that began in silence and grew into spectacle stands on the edge of its final transformation. Not into closure, not into peace, but into truth, raw and incomplete and devastating. And for the first time since 1998, the question is no longer who might have done this. It is how many people failed to stop it. And whether justice, arriving this late and this damaged, can still mean anything at all. The system does not absorb shock gracefully. It shudders, recalibrates, resists. In the days following the arrest, everything slows and accelerates at the same time. Paperwork multiplies. Statements are revised. Timelines are redrawn with a kind of violence, lines erased, so often the page begins to tear. What once felt like a single story now reveals itself as layers of decisions, each one compounding the next. The newly arrested suspect sits in a holding cell under constant watch, volatile energy contained but not extinguished. They talk freely at first, words spilling out in disjointed bursts, anger and self-pity tangled together. They describe the night as chaos, alcohol, old resentment, a confrontation that spiraled faster than anyone expected. They insist they didn't mean to kill anyone. They insist it was never the plan. Plans, they say, belong to people who think ahead. Investigators listen without interrupting, aware that truth often leaks out sideways before it arrives head-on. The suspect paints themselves as abandoned, set up, left behind to clean up a mess that wasn't supposed to exist. They describe another person in the apartment, someone calmer, quieter, someone who knew how to keep control when things went wrong. The implication is clear without being spoken. Responsibility is shared, but guilt is being negotiated. The person of interest, now no longer just of interest, is brought in again. This interview is different. There is no ambiguity left to hide behind. The DNA match has collapsed their deniability, leaving only interpretation. They listen as the new suspect statements are summarized. They close their eyes. When they speak, it is not defiant. It is resigned. They admit to being there. Admit to knowing things were going badly. Admit to leaving when they should have stayed. They say fear made the decision for them. Fear of consequence. Fear of a life unraveling. They insist they never touched the victim, never intended harm. They say silence felt safer than truth, and then silence became habit. The admission lands with a dull finality. Not a confession to murder, but to abandonment, to complicity by omission, to a choice that allowed the worst outcome to stand uncontested for decades. The law will decide what that means. Morally, the weight is already crushing. Prosecutors face an impossible task: 2 suspects, overlapping responsibility, a prior verdict that now looks dangerously incomplete. They must decide how to proceed without unraveling faith in the system entirely. Charges are weighed carefully, degrees of culpability debated late into the night. Every decision feels like a precedent waiting to be challenged. The victim's family is updated again, this time in fragments too heavy to carry all at once. They learn that the night they lost someone was not a single act, but a chain. That there were moments when intervention might have changed everything. That silence did more damage than violence alone. Grief shifts shape, hardening into something sharper. Not just loss, but betrayal. Public reaction fractures along familiar lines. Some feel vindicated, believing the truth has finally clawed its way out. Others are furious, convinced the system wasted years chasing the wrong certainty. Lawsuits are filed. Editorials rage. Experts argue on television about accountability and reform, about how cold cases should be handled and when they should be left alone. Inside the department, reckoning begins. Policies are reviewed. Decisions from the original investigation are scrutinized with unforgiving clarity. No single mistake explains a failure. It was cumulative. Assumptions layered over urgency. Leads deprioritized because they were inconvenient. A hunger for resolution mistaken for progress. The investigator is asked to testify internally, to walk through the entire arc of the case from revival to rupture. They do so calmly, without defensiveness. They know this moment is not about blame. It is about record. About making sure the truth, however uncomfortable, is preserved accurately this time. The newly arrested suspect is formally charged. The courtroom fills again, familiar faces returning with heavier expressions. The reading of charges feels surreal, like watching history stutter and correct itself mid-sentence. The suspect reacts with rage, shouting that everyone else walked away while they were left to rot. The words echo long after they are removed. The person of interest faces charges of their own, different, narrower, but no less devastating. Their defense pivots instantly, reframing them as a witness who made terrible choices rather than a perpetrator. The distinction is thin. The jury will have to decide whether absence can be as damning as action. As pretrial motions begin, the investigator stands once more outside the original apartment complex. The building is quiet, unaware of the weight it carries. They think about the night again, not as a mystery now, but as a sequence of failures. Human ones. The kind that do not announce themselves until years later. This is what justice looks like when it arrives late. Not clean, not triumphant, fragmented, painful, necessary. The cold case is no longer cold. It burns with consequence, forcing everyone involved to confront the uncomfortable truth that solving a crime does not undo its damage. It only names it. And as the system braces for trials that will reopen old wounds and create new ones, one thing becomes clear to everyone watching. The story is not over yet. It has only reached the point where the cost of silence can no longer be ignored. The final phase does not arrive with resolution. It arrives with weight. Court calendars fill. Motions stack like barricades. Every word spoken now carries consequence, not just for the people involved, but for the idea of justice itself. This is the moment where the system must face what it has uncovered and decide whether it can bear the truth it chased for so long. The trials do not begin immediately. Time once again stretches. Legal strategy replaces investigation. Evidence is frozen into exhibits, stories flattened into arguments. The rawness of discovery is translated into language designed to persuade strangers who were not there and will never fully feel the years that pressed down on this case. The investigator watches from the margins now, no longer guiding the narrative, only witnessing it. In court, the newly charged suspect sits rigid, anger simmering just beneath the surface. They no longer posture. The facts have narrowed their options. Their defense argues accident, escalation, a moment that slipped beyond control. They speak of addiction, volatility, a life already falling apart before it collided with the victims. The words sound rehearsed, but not entirely false. Truth here is not clean. It is layered, compromised, human. The second defendant presents differently. Controlled.
Precise.
Their defense focuses on absence, on the space between action and inaction. They admit to being there. They admit to leaving. They argue that leaving is not killing, that fear is not intent. That silence, however damning morally, does not meet the threshold of murder. The courtroom listens, tense, aware that law and ethics are no longer aligned. The victim's family sits through it all. Every detail, every argument about degrees of responsibility. They hear their loved ones' final moments described by strangers, dissected into timelines and hypotheticals. At times, it feels like the system is putting the victim on trial instead, asking what might have provoked this, what could have been done differently. The family learns to breathe through anger, through grief that keeps changing shape. Witnesses testify again, some for the third time in their lives. Their voices carry the strain of repetition, of being asked to remember something they wish they could forget. Experts explain DNA one last time, probabilities turned into certainty, as much as language allows. The secondary profile is no longer secondary. It has a name now, a body, a past that intersects fatally with another. The defense attacks the process relentlessly. They question why it took so long, why mistakes were made, why the system failed, then failed again. The prosecution does not deny it. They cannot. Instead, they argue that delay does not invalidate truth, that discovery is not bound by time, only by persistence. It is not a triumphant argument.
It is a necessary one.
Outside the courtroom, the community watches with a kind of weary attention. There is no spectacle left in this case. No appetite for shock. Only a quiet need to see something honest come from all this damage. Conversations are subdued. Opinions cautious. Everyone has learned how wrong certainty can be. When verdicts finally come, they do not land as thunderclaps. They settle slowly, unevenly. One conviction, one partial, one acquittal, or a lesser charge. The specifics matter less than the feeling they leave behind. No outcome feels complete. No sentence feels equal to the years lost, the trust broken, the harm multiplied by silence. There are no cheers, no closure, only reactions, private and complicated. The victim's family absorbs the result in stillness, eyes forward, hands clenched. Justice, if this is what it looks like, feels distant and abstract. They did not want perfection. They wanted truth. What they received is something adjacent, something filtered through rules and limitations. The investigator watches the room empty again, just as it did decades earlier. Another chapter ends without the satisfaction promised by headlines. The case will be labeled resolved now, officially this time, but the word feels inadequate. Resolution suggests harmony. This is closer to acknowledgement. In the months that follow, reports are written, policies amended, training updated. The case becomes a reference point, a cautionary example cited in classrooms and conferences. A lesson in patience, in doubt, in the danger of premature certainty. It changes procedures. It changes careers. It does not change the past. The apartment complex remains. People come and go, unaware of the full story embedded in its walls. Life moves forward because it has to. The town adjusts slowly, carrying the knowledge that justice can be delayed not just by lack of evidence, but by the stories we choose to believe too soon. The investigator steps away from the case at last, not with relief, but with acceptance. Some truths arrive broken. Some answers carry their own kind of damage. The job was never to make the ending satisfying. It was to make it honest. Years later, The case will still surface in quiet conversations, in late-night searches, in the minds of those who followed it from the beginning. People will ask if it was really solved, if the right people were held accountable, if anything was learned. The answers will vary depending on who is asked. What remains is not a verdict, but a warning. That cold cases are not frozen because they lack heat, but because they are too complex to touch without getting burned. That silence can be as destructive as violence. That justice, when it comes late, demands more humility than celebration. And somewhere, in the space between what was proven and what was felt, the echo of 1998 still lingers. Not as a mystery anymore, but as a reminder of how fragile truth is, of how easily it slips through our hands. The case is closed now. The file returned to its shelf, heavier than before. But the question it leaves behind does not close with it. How many other stories are still waiting, not for answers, but for the courage to ask the right questions before time decides for us again? Time passes, but the case does not fade the way others do. It settles into the background of professional memory, resurfacing not as trauma, but as reference. Investigators mention it in quiet conversations, not by name, but by implication. You remember that one. The one that looked solved until it wasn't. The one that taught us to hesitate. For the victim's family, life resumes in a way that feels almost disloyal. Birthdays come. Seasons change. New griefs arrive to sit beside the old one. They stop being asked for statements, stop being called for updates. The world moves on, and they are left with something that is neither closure nor confusion, but a complicated, uneasy knowledge. They know more now than they once did. They also know how much they will never know. They visit the grave less often, not because the loss has lessened, but because the ritual has changed. What they say there is different. Fewer questions, more statements, more silence. They have learned that some answers, even when they arrive, do not restore what was taken. They only explain the shape of the absence. The convicted suspect adapts to incarceration the way they adapted to chaos, poorly, loudly, defiantly. Appeals are filed. Claims are made. Blame is redistributed endlessly. In letters and recorded calls, they insist the truth is still incomplete, that others escaped consequences, that the story remains unfair. Sometimes they sound convincing. Sometimes they sound desperate. Both can be true at once. The second defendant's outcome follows them everywhere. In paperwork. In whispers. In the way doors open a little slower. They serve their sentence, if one was imposed, or live under the weight of legal judgment without bars. Their greatest punishment is not judicial. It is social. The knowledge that they were present, that they could have changed something, that silence protected them longer than honesty ever would have. Some nights, that knowledge is heavier than any cell. The investigator retires a few years later, not dramatically, not ceremoniously. Their desk is cleared. Their files archived. On their last day, they pause in front of the shelf where the case once lived, fingers resting on the empty space. They do not feel pride. They do not feel regret. They feel something quieter. Responsibility fulfilled, imperfectly. They are asked, occasionally, to speak about the case. At conferences. In classrooms. In interviews framed as lessons. They always say the same thing, no matter how the question is phrased. The danger is not that we don't have enough evidence. The danger is that we decide too early what the evidence means. The case changes how others work. Younger investigators learn to tolerate uncertainty longer, to resist narrative, to let contradictions coexist without forcing resolution. It slows some cases. It complicates others. It saves a few from repeating the same mistake. That is the legacy no headline captures. The apartment complex is renovated again. New paint. New fixtures. The unit where it happened is occupied by people who know nothing of 1998 beyond a vague rumor, a comment overheard, a look exchanged when they mention their address. The walls hold no memory that can be measured. Only time does that. Occasionally, someone new discovers the story. A podcast listener. A student. A neighbor who finally searches the address online. They go deep. They read everything. They emerge with opinions, theories, judgments. They ask whether justice was truly served, whether the right people paid the right price. The answer depends on what they believe justice is supposed to do. Because the truth, in the end, was not a single revelation. It was an accumulation of moments, of failures, of choices made out of fear rather than malice. The system did not miss the truth entirely. It misunderstood it. And misunderstanding, sustained long enough, becomes its own kind of harm. Cold cases are often described as sleeping, waiting. This one was never asleep. It was patient. It allowed assumptions to harden around it, allowed time to dull urgency, allowed the wrong certainty to take root. When it finally moved again, it did not do so to comfort anyone. It moved to correct the record, however painfully. Years later, the title attached to the story still circulates, unchanged. California 1998 Cold Case Cracked. Late-night arrest stuns investigators. It reads differently now. Less like a triumph. More like a warning. Cracked does not mean solved. Arrest does not mean truth. Stunned does not mean prepared. The people who lived inside the case understand this better than anyone. They know that answers are not endpoints. They are responsibilities. And that every time we close a file, we should ask ourselves whether we are done learning or simply tired of looking. Somewhere, another cold case sits on a shelf, quiet, unassuming, waiting for the wrong story to be told about it. The lesson of 1998 lingers there, unseen but present, urging caution, urging patience, urging doubt. Because the most dangerous moment in any investigation is not when nothing makes sense. It is when everything seems to. And that is where this story truly ends. Not with certainty, not with peace, but with the understanding that truth is fragile, justice is human, and time does not forgive mistakes, it only reveals them. Fade to silence. The silence after the fade does not last. It never does. Stories like this have a way of resurfacing, not because they are unresolved, but because they refuse to stay contained. Long after the file is closed, long after the verdicts are entered into record, the case continues to echo in places no transcript can reach. It surfaces in dreams, fragmented and out of order, for people who were only briefly involved. A dispatcher who remembers the call but not the voice. A patrol officer who drove past the building that night without knowing why the street felt wrong. A lab technician who handled the sample years later and felt a chill they couldn't explain. None of them carry the whole story, but each holds a shard sharp enough to cut. The victim's name appears less often now. Anniversaries pass without cameras. Online search is slow. But absence does not mean forgetting. It means the memory has been absorbed into something quieter, something internal. The kind of remembrance that doesn't announce itself, but alters decisions in small, permanent ways. A former juror from the trial keeps the notebook they were allowed to take home, pages filled with careful handwriting and question marks that never found answers. Sometimes they reread it, not to revisit guilt or innocence, but to understand how certainty once felt so persuasive. They realize now how easily a story can outrun doubt if everyone agrees to stop questioning at the same time. In law schools, the case is dissected clinically. Timelines reduced to bullet points. Errors categorized. Students debate what should have happened, what could have been prevented. It all sounds cleaner in theory. In practice, hesitation is punished, decisiveness rewarded. The lesson is learned, then tested, then forgotten, then learned again by someone else. The second defendant tries to rebuild something resembling a life. It is slow, awkward. Every introduction carries risk. Every relationship begins with a calculation. How much truth? How soon? They learn that some people are drawn to damage, while others recoil from it instinctively. They accept both reactions without argument. Arguing no longer feels useful. The convicted suspect grows quieter over time. Rage burns out. What replaces it is not remorse, but reflection, heavy and repetitive. They replay the night endlessly, searching for the moment where a different choice might have altered everything. They never land on one. The tragedy, they come to understand too late, was not a single decision but a pattern of them. Some nights, the investigator wakes up convinced they missed something else. Another detail, another thread. They sit in the dark, running through the case again, not because it is unsolved, but because their mind still treats it like a living thing. Eventually, the feeling passes. It always does. But it always returns. Years from now, a young detective will pull an old file while chasing a different case. They will notice the references, the footnotes, the cautious language where certainty once lived. They will recognize the shape of restraint. And maybe, just maybe, they will pause before closing their own case too quickly. That is how these stories survive. Not as headlines, not as shock, but as influence. The town itself carries on, unaware of how much it has changed. New families move in. Old ones move away. The past becomes architectural rather than emotional, embedded in streets and buildings that have outlived their darkest moments. The community does not speak of the case often, but it has learned to distrust easy answers, and that lesson lingers. Cold cases are often imagined as puzzles waiting for the right mind. This one was something else entirely. A mirror. It reflected not just what happened, but how people respond to fear, to pressure, to the unbearable need for things to make sense. In the end, no voiceover can truly close it. No final line can contain what it exposed. The story resists a full stop, because life does too. Consequences ripple outward, diminishing but never disappearing, like sound traveling through water. What remains is not mystery, but memory. A memory of how close certainty can come to being wrong. A memory of how silence can feel safer than truth. A memory of how time does not heal errors, it amplifies them. And somewhere in another city, another year, another investigator opens a file and feels that familiar chill. The sense that this case, too, wants to be finished. The question they will face is the same one that echoes from 1998, unchanged by technology or time. Do we want this closed?
Or do we want it right?
The answer, as always, will define everything that follows. Eventually, even echoes grow faint. Not gone, just distant, folded into the background noise of other lives, other crimes, other unfinished stories. The case becomes something people reference in passing, a cautionary phrase rather than a lived experience. Yet for those who are closest to it, the distance never fully forms. The victim's family reaches a point where talking about the case feels different.
Not raw anymore.
Not sharp. More like touching a scar to remind yourself it's there. They stop correcting details when others get them wrong. They stop arguing about timelines and responsibility. What matters to them now is simpler, heavier. Someone they loved is still gone. That fact outlives every verdict. They find meaning where they can. One of them volunteers with a support group for families of unsolved crimes. They listen more than they speak. When they do talk, they don't offer hope. They offer honesty. That answers, when they come, are rarely the shape you expect. That knowing is not the same as relief. The investigator, long removed from daily police work, follows the occasional update out of habit. An appeal denied. A sentence adjusted. A civil case settled quietly. Each development registers like a dull pulse. Proof that the story is still moving, even without them. Sometimes they wonder if they would do anything differently. The answer is yes and also no. Hindsight offers clarity without consequence, and clarity is easy when the risk has already been paid. In the moment, decisions were made with the information available, the pressure relentless, the margin for error invisible until it was gone. The case continues to influence how evidence is taught, how timelines are interrogated, how silence is interpreted. It becomes an example not of brilliance, but of restraint, of learning to sit with uncertainty instead of rushing to resolve it. That lesson travels quietly, embedded in protocols and instincts rather than headlines. There are nights when the investigator drives past a familiar stretch of road without meaning to. Muscle memory. A turn taken automatically. They recognize it halfway through and consider correcting course, then don't. They let the road take them where it always did, just once more. When they pass the old apartment complex, they don't slow down.
They don't need to.
The image is permanent now. The people who live there today laugh on balconies, carry groceries up the stairs, argue about parking. Life insists on itself, indifferent to what came before. That indifference is not cruelty. It is survival. Buildings, like people, cannot carry everything forever. Online, the case still resurfaces occasionally, reframed by new voices. Threads speculate. Videos analyze. Armchair theories bloom and collapse. Some get it right by accident. Some get it wrong with confidence. None of them feel the weight of consequence the way those inside the case did. They consume the story without inheriting its cost. And maybe that is inevitable. Stories travel lighter than truth. What the case ultimately leaves behind is not a warning etched in stone, but a tension that never fully resolves. Between speed and care. Between certainty and doubt. Between the need to act and the need to wait. That tension lives at the heart of every investigation, whether acknowledged or not. Cold cases are not just about the past. They're about the future decisions shaped by what the past revealed. This one taught that answers can arrive too late to save anyone, but not too late to matter. That damage can be named even when it cannot be undone. As years stack on years, the case stops feeling like a single story and starts feeling like a fracture line, something that subtly altered the landscape around it. Careers bent. Policies shifted. People learned to pause where they once would have rushed. And somewhere beneath all of that, a quieter truth settles in. Justice is not a moment. It is a process that never stops asking whether it did enough. The case from California, 1998, no longer demands attention. It no longer shocks.